It's an honor for me to read to you the message sent to us by the sponsor of today's session, Mrs. Barbara Osband, in tribute to the memory of her late husband, Dr. Michael Osband, Zichrono Livracha. As Barbara wrote, Michael, Zichrono Livracha, is remembered for many things. I will mention just a few that stand out when we think of him. His love of family and devotion to his children. Michael once took a red-eye back from the West Coast to see his son Sidor play. And once, he spent 36 hours in Paris to see his daughter on their joint birthdays. Michael was known in our community for his love of learning and teaching, and in the novel approaches he would take with Jewish texts. And he was a beloved pediatrician. He treated children beyond their medical needs. He paid phone bills for families. He bought SAT books for children whose families could not afford them. He was also known for his sense of humor, which you could never escape if you were having a conversation with Michael. Lastly, Michael loved Yerushalayim and Israel and was proud to call Yerushalayim his home. Michael was taken from us far too early on Yom Yerushalayim. May his memory be a blessing for us always.
Thank you, Jay. Thanks to all of you for being here today for our Pardes Tiyul, a little bit different than our usual walking along with Shulie, enjoying the beautiful Jerusalem streets, but I know that Shulie is going to bring this alive for us. I'm going to ask everybody to stay muted, and which will help with the sound as Shulie presents. And if you feel comfortable shutting your video, that also is helpful with the bandwidth as we are a large group of people. So look forward. Shulie, are you with us? And I'm taking down this.
Yeah, you're hearing me. It's good.
Yeah. Okay.
We're gonna get started. Well, first of all, it's beautiful to see everybody here. Really, it's so many people that I know, that I've seen on past tours, that I know their names. It's really very special, and it's wonderful. And I want us to be back walking on the streets again soon. We hope so. It's an honor to do this tour. I did it last year as well. I didn't know Dr. Osman, but I know two of his children, and really wonderful people. And it's a pleasure to be able to do something for somebody so special. So here's what we're going to do. Okay? We are going to take a look around at the Jewish Quarter, and we're going to try to understand what happened there after the 6-Day War. And the 6-Day War was a miraculous event. We celebrated Yerushalayim last week, 53 years since the unification of the liberation of the city, and the 6-Day War in so many ways was a truly miraculous event. Certainly in the sense of saving lives, in the sense of, tell me if it's better, Deborah?
That's better, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if it's not clear, so just chat to Deborah and tell her, and hopefully it will stay clear. Or in the sense of just the avoiding of what could have been a terrible apocalypse, and people who were alive at that time, or if you've read anything about that time, you know that graves were dug, cemeteries were prepared, Jews came from Boulevard to volunteer, because really nobody knew what was going to happen. And nobody knew how this was going to work, and if we were going to survive, and if, God forbid, the state of Israel at age 19 would be finished. Thank God that didn't happen, and we had an incredible miracle in terms of, all right, I see there's a lot of chats that the sound is not good. Is it better when I hold the mic like this? Yeah? Okay. The war itself was miraculous in saving lives and in creating borders that made Israel so much more sustainable. But there were more smaller miracles along the way. And one of the smaller but very important miracles was that we discovered archaeology. Okay? Archaeology that was there, but that nobody knew had existed beforehand. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of problems that people are sending in. Deborah, what are we going to do? You want to announce?
I think that if you feel comfortable and you can check your video, it also helps with the bandwidth. And then after the tour, everybody can turn their videos on again. It does not mean that you are not an active participant in the program.
Okay, and I hope that my
and that usually that will help.
Okay, we're going to try our best.
That sounds good.
Does not sound good?
No, that sounds good now.
Good. Okay, so back on track. So one of the smaller miracles, but a very, very important one, is the miracle of archaeology. What do I mean by that? I mean that places that had been off limits, that couldn't be discovered because they were not under Israeli control, because they were built up for so many different reasons, suddenly after the 6th War, a whole new world of archaeology opened up, whether it was in Judea and Samaria, and someone like Adam Zartal, who did a huge survey of all of Samaria, finding out so many things. In the Golan, we discovered where Gamla was. All these things are going on still now. And by the way, Mike Osband, Michael's son, does excavations on a Beit Knesset in the Golan. So that's a nice connection here. And so many other places, but the place where the greatest revolution happened was in the Jewish quarter in the old city of Jerusalem. And that's really what we're going to explore. Okay. Yeah, everybody has to mute their own speakers. Okay, so we're going to start by taking a look at some pictures, at some screens, and hopefully that will make everything very clear. So where are we going? All right, where are we going today? We are going to be exploring the Jewish quarter. All right, we're going to be exploring the Jewish quarter of the old city, and we're going to be traveling around. And this should be something that looks somewhat familiar to everybody. Where's the Western Wall Plaza? Where's the Ophel, the archaeological garden down by the southern wall? We are going to be up on the Rova, Churba Square, Bate Masa Square, etc. And that's what we are going to be taking a look at and understanding. Now, what happened is like this. We knew, everybody knew, that there were hundreds upon hundreds of years of excavations that existed, that not excavations, of life that existed under the surface in the old city, right? People knew that it had been a place that had been lived in for centuries upon centuries. Nobody knew how long. That's one of the things we're going to talk about. But it had been lived in for centuries upon centuries. Why didn't anybody ever excavate it? To understand that, let's take a look at our next slide, okay? And our next slide is a picture of
Shulie, I'm sorry, but you're breaking up. I think you need to either have the microphone near you or...
My is right near me.
Hey, that's good when you talk like that. You can't...
I hold it. Okay, I apologize. Did this last week and it worked great, but internet in the gush, not one of the things fixed by the 6-Day War. Okay, so Deborah, you keep telling me if anything is problematic. Okay, so what we are looking at here is a photograph of the Jewish quarter from before 1948. And you can see one of the things that stand out, by the way, besides, of course, the Dome of the Rock in the top right of the paint of the photograph. But if you look towards the bottom of the photograph, and on the right and on the left, you can see two domes. The one on the left is the Churba Synagogue. The one on the right is the Tiferet Israel Synagogue. That whole area is the Jewish quarter, okay, pre-48. And it is unbelievably dense. Okay, if you think the old city today, the Jewish quarter today is dense and alleyway and crowded, nothing like what it was before 1948. Very, very, very crowded. A lot more like what the rest of the old city looks like today. When you walk in the old city, anybody who's ever had to walk through the Shuk, through the Christian quarter, and then getting to the Jewish quarter, you get to the Jewish quarter and you say, oh, wow, there's so much space here, right? Because the Christian quarter, the Muslim quarter, those are what the old city always looked like. The Jewish quarter looks different, looks more open, because so much of it was destroyed and rebuilt. So this was just a very dense urban area, no option to dig in such a place. How could you dig? How could you excavate? Okay. What happens? How does that change? Okay. What happens is this. Okay? What happens is that along come the Jordanians. After a terrible siege, terrible battles, the Old City and the Jewish Quarter in particular were the stage of battles, the most battles in the entire Six-Day War, okay? 6 straight months from when the United Nations declares partition at the end of November 1947 until the end of May 1948 when the Jewish Quarter surrenders to the Jordanians. Constant battles, okay, in which a lot of damage was done to smaller, more minor buildings, but the larger damage was done when the conquest actually happened. And what did the Jordanians do? The Jordanians came in and essentially blew up or desecrated the major buildings that are there. What were the major buildings? The synagogues. Okay? Abdallah Attal, the Jordanian commander, says, I want to destroy the Jewish quarter so that Jews will never be able to live here. Okay? So the Jordanians destroyed what there was, didn't really build very much. And when the Jews returned after the Six-Day War, there was something of a blank slate going on. And the decision had to be made what was going to be done with that blank slate. And that brings us, I'm just checking in for a second. We're okay on sound? Yes? No? Tell me.
Okay.
We're okay. Beautiful. Okay. That brings us to our hero of the day, and that's Professor Nachman Avigad. We are going to be spending a lot of time with Professor Nachman Avigad and with his book, okay? Very nice book called Ha'ir Ha'elyona Shel Yerushalayim, the Upper City of Jerusalem, a book that was basically written for the public. It's not an archaeological report. It's taking all the stuff that he discovered and putting it in a way that people can really approach and understand. Who is Nachman Avigad? What's the story that's going on here? So Nachman Avigad, Professor Nachman Avigad, was born in the Ukraine, right? Trained as an architect, made Aliyah, right, in 1926, and started to work in archaeology, and in effect was one of the people who created the Department of Archaeology in the Hebrew University, right? Israeli archaeology, Jewish archaeology did not exist, and he was one of the people who helped to create it. One of the first digs he worked on together with Binyamin Mazar, another one of the revolutionary founding archaeologists of Israel, was the excavations in Beit Sha'arim. Okay, the necropolis in Beit Sha'arim. And as you can understand from the dates here, by the time we got to the Six-Day War, Professor Avigad was a very established senior figure on the cusp of retiring. Okay, now what happened in 67? Okay, in 67, everybody kind of looked around at what had been wrought in the Old City and said, okay, now what? What are we going to do? And as sometimes happens in Israel, occasionally, there was quite a bit of a balagan. Right? Everybody had different ideas. All different kinds of bodies were involved. Was the Old City going to be under the control of the Parks Department or of the religious services, right? The Misrad Datot. Who was going to be in charge? What was it going to look like? Right? There were suggestions that it should be rebuilt exactly the way it was in 1948 on the eve of the destruction, and should be a living museum. Right? I don't know how many people wanted to go back to living in the conditions that they were in 48, but that was one suggestion. Another suggestion was that this should become the religious center of Israel, meaning the offices of the chief rabbinate, an enormous 5,000 person synagogue, right? All kinds of religious offices, synagogues on your way down to the Western Wall. Those were different kinds of suggestions. But of course, in the process of beginning to build anything in the Jewish quarter, and there was definitely a desire to resettle as soon as possible. In the process, they did what are called salvage excavations. They started to excavate, see what there was underneath, and they started to realize, wait a second, there's an awful lot here. Okay? And Professor Avigad was asked if he would lead these excavations. Now, he writes in his book, and it's actually fascinating when you read it. He says, I wasn't sure, I hesitated. Did I want to do this? First of all, I was going to go on a sabbatical and I had to write a book. Second, who knows what really is here, right? It could be amazing. It could be terrible. We who are going to hear what they found are like, how could you even hesitate for a moment? But he does hesitate. He's not sure if he wants to do it. Eventually, He takes the plunge. He decides he's going to do it. They start to dig in 68. They dig until 1982. 1982, okay, 14 years. Not only that, anybody who's ever worked or knows about an archaeological dig knows that you dig from 6 to 8 weeks a year. That's usually what you do in the summertime. The rest of the year, you go back to the lab, you analyze what you did. Here, they dug round the year, unless it was pouring rain or snow. Still Jerusalem after all. They were digging, meaning 8 to 10 months a year. They were digging in Jerusalem while the infrastructure was being laid. And I want to give you guys a little bit of a picture. What did it look like? Okay, this is a picture in the midst of the excavations. Okay, this is what the Jewish quarter looked like. And anybody who is listening to this lecture and was in Israel, was in Jerusalem in the early 70s, I'm sure remembers a scene like this. And people have told me that when they would go to the old city, they would get lost every single time, even if they would go 1 month and then another month, right? Because it looked different every time, because the excavation was so massive, so widespread. And Avigad himself says it in such a powerful way, it seemed the old city would never reveal its secrets, and only an extraordinary event would create a situation where it would be possible to do serious excavations in Jerusalem. And here we go, an extraordinary event, the War of 1948, the War of 1967. That was the extraordinary event that took place here. Just to understand the complexity of what's going on. In those 14 years, they're not just digging. Okay, they're digging and they're laying the infrastructure. They're preserving and they're covering up. And anybody who's walked around in the Jewish quarter knows that there are certain things that are preserved, that are out there in public that you can see. There are other things that were hidden, that were covered up. Okay. Meanwhile, you had to put in sewer lines and phone lines and electricity, and these two activities, one of being an archaeologist and the other of being a builder and somebody who is creating a new neighborhood, they are diametrically opposed, and that the two could work together and each succeed so well is really an incredible thing. Now, Avigad had a bunch of different questions that he wanted to answer in these excavations, and we're going to deal with some of them as we go along. So we'll start with this one, okay? The writing is in Hebrew, but you should be able to understand it even just based on the picture. Let's take a look just at the map, the drawing on the left. Okay, and what you can see is that long, kind of narrow space, right, from the Temple Mount, Har HaBayit on the top, heading down to the Ophel and Ir David in the city of David. Okay, the beginnings of Jerusalem are the city of David, Yevus, that little narrow tongue at the bottom near the Gihon Spring. Okay, that's how the city is for the first 1,000+ years of its existence. King David conquers it, makes it his capital, builds the Ophel, right, moves north and adds a new neighborhood. His son Solomon comes along and builds even more, builds the Temple Mount, okay, builds the temple on top of Mount Moriah. Now, there was a question for give or take 100 years amongst the scholars of Jerusalem. At what point does the city of Jerusalem expand to the Western Hill, to the left, okay? We know that in late Second Temple times, the Jewish quarter, the Western Hill, right, whatever we want to call it, was part of the city. Did that already happen in First Temple times? That's our question, okay? Now, up until 1967, there were a lot of people who had answers, right? There were minimalists, that's the map on the left. There were maximalists, that's the map on the right. Neither side had any proof whatsoever. They were theories because nobody had ever dug in the Jewish quarter, so nobody really knew. And this was one of the major questions that Avigad wanted to answer in his excavating. Now, as they dug, they uncovered all sorts of artifacts that were connected to First Temple times, particularly to what's called the Iron II, right? The 8th century BC, the 7th century BC, and on, okay? Whether it was pottery, whether it was lovely idols like this one, right? We know idols were very much a part of Israelite settlements in First Temple times. Unfortunately, this was very, very common. Whether it was special tax receipt jar handles called lamelech handles, lots of different artifacts were found. Artifacts are very nice. They give you a sense that people were living in Jerusalem in First Temple times, but they don't prove that people were living in this area. You could go for a picnic, you could go for a walk, you were traveling somewhere, you dropped something. It's not a proof that people are living there. The proof that people are living there is if we find structures, and particularly if we find a wall. What do we find next? Okay, and this is a modern picture. This is a picture that many of you cite, that many of you have seen, have been to in the Jewish Quarter, the Broad Wall. Okay, you can look, street level is where the car is up on top, street level of today, and you look down on this massive wall made out of field stones, not these huge Herodian stones. It's not Second Temple style. It's clearly First Temple style. If you look at the marker on the wall, the blue and white, that shows you how tall we think this wall was. This is called the Broad Wall. Avigad found this, hit the jackpot. Right? He said, this is it. This is a wall from First Temple times. And if we have a wall, then that means that the city had expanded to here. Now, this is what it looks like today. I want you guys to see how it looked like in the excavations. This is an extraordinary picture. I just love this picture, right? You can see the man in the middle standing where we were looking before. You get a sense of the size of the wall. We're going to look back at a map in a few minutes and understand where did this wall go exactly. But basically what this shows us is that the city had expanded to the other hill, okay? Like it says in Tehillim, in Psalms, Jerusalem is Ir shechubra la yachdav, a city that is joined together. And there are all kinds of nice philosophical, spiritual, emotional ways to explain that. But it also means physically a city that joins its two hills, the eastern hill and the western hill, together, and they are enclosed by one wall. Now, at what point does this happen? Why does this happen? Based on the style, based on the building style, based on the pottery that's found nearby, Avigad dates this wall to the time period of Hezekiah, Chizkiyahu, Hezekiah, king of Judah. Hezekiah, king of Judah, who rules in the 720s, 710s. Okay, we're going backwards, right? BC. Why does he build this wall? Why does the city grow during his time? Okay, that's a very good question, which seems to have a very clear answer. Okay, Chizkiyahu lives during the time that the northern kingdom, remember at this point, Judah and Israel have been separated into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom of Israel has been conquered, okay, by the Assyrians. The 10 tribes have been sent into exile. That's the end of the northern kingdom. They are finished. The only kingdom that remains is the southern kingdom, is Judah. Okay? Now, why does that make the city bigger? Because we assume that not everybody was sent into exile. Some people managed to escape. They were refugees. Where are these Israelite refugees going to go? They're going to go to the only place that's left for them to go to, and that's Jerusalem. That's Judea. They go south. They move to Jerusalem. Jerusalem grows, okay? And we have other projects from the time of Chizkiyahu, like the water, moving the water further west, okay? That give us a sense that the city grows. That's one reason. The city grows, you need to expand the city. Why build the wall? Because you build the wall because Chizkiyahu also has trouble with the Assyrians. In the beginning, he pays taxes. Everything is nice. At some point, he says, I'm a righteous king. I'm a good king. I don't need to pay these taxes. I'm going to rebel against the Assyrians. Along come the Assyrians and attack. Chizkiyahu prepares by fortifying and building this wall. So here we have this great wall, which is a proof for some of the stories in Tanakh. It gives us a sense of where the new suburbs are. We know in the prophets and the Nevi'im, we hear about neighborhoods called the Mishneh, the Machtesh. They're in this area, this new area. Okay, now one of the really extraordinary things, if you go to the Broad Wall and you look down, you might not even notice it because it's so small, but you will see, you can see that perpendicular, not exactly perpendicular, but more or less perpendicular to the wall on the left are little rooms. Hope you're able to see that. Now, what's strange about it, what you don't see in the picture, but you clearly see in real life, is that these rooms are not on the inside of the wall, right? We know that people built their houses up against the wall, right? We know about casemate walls in First Temple times that actually have rooms within the walls. That's not what this is, okay? This is a house that's outside the walls. Why would you build your house outside the walls? Not safe, not a good idea, okay? The answer is this was not a house that was built outside the walls. This was a house that was built before the wall, and along comes the king and says, I want my wall to go here. So sorry, pack up, time to go, okay? And this is a house that was abandoned when the wall was built, and we have a hint of this in the prophet Isaiah, who's a contemporary of Chizkiyahu, of Hezekiah. And what does he say? He criticizes Chizkiyahu for various things, and this is one of them. V'at batei Yerushalayim spartem, v'titzu habatim levatzer hachoma. And you counted the houses of Jerusalem and pulled houses down to fortify the wall. And here's the house. It's right here. It's really an incredible thing to see. And what happens? What happens with this story? Does the wall protect Chizkiyahu? Does his faith protect Chizkiyahu? So here's where we get to the story, which is really a very powerful story, and you understand how powerful it is because it's written about in 3 separate places in Tanakh. Right? We have a version of this story in Melachim, in the Book of Kings. We have another version of it in Chronicles, in Divrei Yamim, additional, not another, right? Adding different pieces here and there. And we also hear about it in the Book of Isaiah, 3 contemporaneous books, all of them telling this story. What happens? The wall is fortified. The soldiers are standing on the wall and on the tower. Along comes the Assyrian army, which by all accounts, the Assyrians were terrifying. They were terrified. They were good at physical warfare. They were good at psychological warfare. They were a very formidable enemy. And they come, and according to the Book of Kings, they speak to the soldiers on the wall, and they tell them, give it up. There's no way that your God is going to defeat us. There's no way that you are going to survive. And the people are shaking in their boots, including Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu had so much confidence. He's also terrified. And he goes to Yeshayahu, he goes to Isaiah, and he says to him, what's going to be? And Isaiah says, don't worry. God's going to protect the city. God is not going to let this city fall. Hitziporim afot, like birds that are flying, God is going to protect Jerusalem. And according to the Book of Kings, the Assyrian soldiers drop dead. They all die of a plague. We don't know what. And the Assyrians retreat. Okay, you say, that's the Bible spin on the story. But did that really happen? So we have 2 other amazing proofs that it really did happen. Number 1, in archaeology, when there is a conquest, when there is a destruction, archaeologists love destruction. Destruction is amazing because everything caves in and you have all the artifacts that are left there inside the houses that have caved in. You have ashes, you have all kinds of burnt up things. It's very clear to see where there was battle, where there was war. We do not have a layer of destruction from this time period. We have a very clear layer of destruction 100 years later when the Babylonians come along. But there is no layer of destruction from 701, from when the Assyrians come to Jerusalem. Not only that, the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, right, like all kings, loves to talk about his exploits. They didn't have Twitter in those days. So what do? You write down your exploits in various places, whether it's in a book, it's on the walls of your palace, it's on, in this case, a prism. Okay? And you can see the cuneiform writing on the prism. This is called Sennacherib's prism. And he writes, and I conquered this one, and I conquered that one, and I destroyed this one, I destroyed that one. And as for Hezekiah, king of Judah, I shut him up like a bird in a cage. What does that mean? That's spin, okay? That's spin language for saying the siege was great. Let me tell you all about the siege. The conquest, not so much, okay? If he doesn't say he conquered him, he didn't conquer him. Okay, so we have a sense that this divine protection saved Jerusalem. Now, we have another important site from First Temple times. And for that, we're going to go to a little bit further away from the Broad Wall. Now, if the Broad Wall is something that's familiar to all of us who have been in the Jewish Quarter, the Israelite Tower is much less familiar. Why is it much less familiar? Because it's one of the sites that was not chosen to be kept out in public. If you want to see the Israelite Tower, not so simple. You have to make arrangements in advance. You have to go into a nice apartment building about a half a block away from the Broad Wall. You have to go down many, 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 many steps, and then you will see the Israelite Tower. So it's hidden, but it doesn't make it any less important. Now, one of the extraordinary things about it, and you can see it from this picture, is it is deep under the ground. Okay, when you go north from the Broad Wall, there's a valley. Okay, there's a dip. There's a valley in today. It's been built up by street level, but in the olden days there was an actual valley, and this tower was built in the valley. Now, Nachman Avigad writes about how they dug and they dug and they dug and they dug and they dug 10 meters. Okay, 30 feet down. That's pretty deep, and they didn't find anything. But he says, you know what? We had made a principle. We had made a decision in the beginning that everywhere we were digging, we were going to dig till we hit bedrock. 10 meters down was not bedrock. They kept digging. They dug another 2 meters. 12 meters down, they started to see the first stones in the wall. 12 meters down, right? 36 feet. That's really amazing. And they found this beautiful tower. Now, what is this tower? What was it part of? That's the picture that I'm showing you here. Okay, if you look at the drawing on your right, you'll see two different pieces. Okay, you'll see that U-shaped wall in the back. That's the Broad Wall, okay? Once you cross over the Broad Wall towards the towers, you're essentially out of the city, okay? But then we have an extra layer of protection, and that's what these towers were part of. Now, it's a very interesting question. Were the towers built concurrently with the wall as two layers of protection? Were the towers built later because people said, well, maybe the wall isn't enough? After the Assyrians left, they said, well, maybe we need to do something more serious. We don't know. Okay, what we do know is that by the time the Babylonians arrived, these towers are here. Okay, this gate may be a gate that's talked about in the book of Jeremiah, Shar HaTavech, the middle gate. We don't know for sure, but we definitely know it was here in the time of the Babylonians because we have evidence of a battle here. Okay, we found arrowheads here. We found ashes here. If you look at the drawing on your left, you'll see that the black is the tower that was found. The dotted lines are the conjecture. Maybe there were another 3 towers. Why do we think that? Because if you've seen First Temple sites, you know it's very common to have a 4-chambered gate, a 6-chambered gate. So this is a possible reconstruction of that. But there definitely was some kind of fortification here. Okay. The other thing that's very interesting is something that you can see in the drawing. It's harder to see it in the real picture. Number 2, which is the black, right? That's the Israelite Tower. But to the right of it, adjacent, abutting it, is number 4. That's also real. It's not a suggestion. And that's a tower, another tower, but not from First Temple times, from 500 years later. That's from Hasmonean times. And one of the things that's fascinating, the more we uncover in Jerusalem, the more we see that the wall that Hezekiah built in the 700s BCE is in the same line 500 years later. Along come the Hashmonaim, the Hasmoneans. They also build a wall around the city. The wall had already been destroyed. People started living again on the Western Hill, and their wall follows almost the same lines as Hezekiah's wall. They're not always aware that they're in the same place because it's 500 years later, but it's the most logical place to put the wall. So these are 2 different places from First Temple times. We are going to go on and see some of the other time periods that Avigad found. But before we get to the Cardo, I'll just take us back to the Broad Wall for 1 minute. Sorry. Avigad was asked, you know, when he reflected on all he had done, okay, he thought about what was the most significant thing that he found. Now we're going to see in a little bit finds from Second Temple times, the Herodian Quarter, the burnt house. Those are definitely the most spectacular finds. They're the most beautiful finds.
Wow.
Houses,
Really, that wall is the
furniture,
most
all
interesting.
kinds of things. Wherever you are, please mute your mic. This is less impressive in terms of its beauty, but Avigad said this is the most important thing I found in all these 14 years of excavation, because it changes our whole understanding of First Temple times. It helps us to understand that the city grew in that time, and it grew to the Western Hill. And he says, for me, this was the most earth-shattering thing, the most important thing in all the excavations that I did. So we're going to leave the First Temple period, but realize how significant it was, and we are going to move to other periods. The Cardo is something that we all are familiar with, right? Anyone who's been to Jerusalem knows the Cardo. See the Cardo on the outside here. You see the Cardo on the inside, okay? What is the Cardo? Where is it? What is important about it? So the Cardo is a main street. One of the very interesting things in modern Jerusalem of today is that the Cardo essentially has a few parts, right? If you start in the Jewish quarter, you can walk through the archaeological excavation of the Cardo, which you see here, the outside part we saw a minute ago, the inside part. If you continue walking, you get to the modern kind of boutique-y, fancy stores of the Jewish quarter, the same street, okay? The Cardo as kind of a tourist attraction. But if you keep walking, right, you keep going north on that same street, you're in the Shuk, you're in the Arab market, and it's the same street, right? So what's this street? This is the main north-south street of Jerusalem, begun in Roman times after the temple has been, the second temple has been destroyed, continued in Byzantine times when the Roman Empire becomes Christian. It is a street that goes from the north, from Damascus Gate, the major gate in the city, all the way to the south to what today is Zion Gate, is Shar Tzion, then was a very important church called the Nia Church, bisects the city, right? Today, the real center of the city. Why did the Byzantines and the Romans need a street like this? Well, let's think about it for a second. Second Temple times, the main street of the city is near the temple, right? If you go down to where the Western Wall is, or if you go into the Western Wall tunnels, or if you go to the Southern Wall excavations, that's the main street of the city. It's running along the walls around the Temple Mount. When the temple is destroyed, two things happen. Number one, that street is covered with enormous boulders. There are no bulldozers in the ancient world, okay? You can't clear that street even if you wanted to. Number two, nobody wants to. Well, I don't need to have my main street there near a destroyed temple. That's not important to me. What's important to me, say the Byzantines, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is really very, very close to the Cardo. That's where they build this main street. It's an enormous boulevard. It's 22.5 meters wide, okay? Almost more than 60 feet wide, with stores on either side, with plenty of space in the middle for carriages, with space for processions, because we know in the Byzantine period, processions are a big deal, right? Religious processions going through the city from one important religious site to the next. This is the major boulevard of downtown Jerusalem. Okay, this is it. Just to give us an idea of what it may have looked like. This is a drawing, a painting that was created by French artists, a company called Ile de la Cité, which is in the Cardo of today. And you get a sense, first of all, obviously it was open air, okay, with stores on either side, with merchants going along, people from all over the world. Byzantine Jerusalem, okay, Christian Jerusalem was a very cosmopolitan city. Pilgrims came from all over to come to see the holy places. Who's the one group that's missing from the scene? We are, okay? Jews are missing from the scene because the Romans, after the Bar Kokhba revolt in the 2nd century, continuing through the time of the Byzantines, forbade Jews from coming to Jerusalem. Okay? Jews are not allowed to come into Jerusalem. They are only allowed to come there one day a year, Tisha B'Av. Jews are allowed to enter the city to weep over the destruction, but otherwise they are not allowed into the city. So this is a city that is Judenrein, that is empty of Jews. Up until a few years ago, some people here may remember, the menorah, the golden menorah that was recreated by the Temple Institute, by Machon HaMikdash, was set up in the Cardo. Today it's in the Chorva Square, in the middle of everything, but it used to be in the Cardo, and I always like that. And on the one hand, it's very anachronistic. It's not the right place. On the other hand, it's amazing. Here we are in this street where Jews were not allowed, and here we have this menorah that's rebuilt. The plan is to put it in the temple. So that's kind of a neat combination. Now, the Cardo is the one thing that Avigad, and here we have a great picture of Avigad, right? In that picture, if you look all the way on the left, you can see, I cut it off a little bit. You can see two figures in the picture here. We'll see the three now that are not kind of your standard canned figures. These are nice, good, isn't the Jewish faces, okay? Who are they? The artist put them in as an homage to the people who were responsible for the excavations. The one on the right in the white robes is Teddy Kollek, right? The mythological mayor of Jerusalem for so many years. The one on the left with the beautiful red and gold is Nachman Avigad, of course. And then the one in the back is Hillel Geba, also an important and much younger at the time archaeologist, but also very involved in digging in the Cardo. Now, as I said before, many surprises awaited the archaeologists in the old city. The Cardo was not a surprise. They knew they were going to find the Cardo. They didn't know how it would look. They didn't know in what state it would be, but they knew that it existed. How did they know it existed? Because they knew about this map. This is a map that I'm sure many people have seen. This is, of course, a copy of it. There's a few copies of it around Jerusalem. If you want to see the real one, you have to travel to a place called Medva in Jordan. Right? In the late 19th century, in this town Medva, a church was discovered from the Byzantine period, 1500-year-old church. The floor of the church was a very large mosaic map of the land of Israel. Why would you put in such a thing? Because like I said before, pilgrimage is a big deal in Byzantine times. If you can't actually get to Jerusalem, you want to take a look at the pictures of Jerusalem. I want to feel like I'm there. Now, for scholars, for tour guides, for geographers, for historians, this map is amazing because it's essentially a snapshot of what the land looked like. And it's clear the people who made it had been to Jerusalem, had been to the land of Israel. It's a snapshot of what the land of Israel looked like at the time. We are focusing on one very important part, okay, the Greek on top, Hagia Polis Yerushalayim, the holy city of Jerusalem, and you can see very clearly how there is a large gate on the left, okay, a gate with a plaza in front with a pillar in it, okay. Those of us who ride the light rail, right, know that if you go towards Damascus Gate, it'll say in Hebrew Shar Shem, in English Damascus Gate, and in Arabic Bab el Amud, the gate of the pillar of the Amud. Why? There hasn't been a pillar there in a very long time, but Jerusalem has a very long memory. Okay, when the Romans built a triumphal arch of Damascus Gate, before it's even the gate in a wall, it's just a triumphal arch, they build a plaza right inside with a pillar with a bust of the Emperor Hadrian on it. And that was still around in Byzantine times. So that's the pillar. And if you continue from the pillar, you'll see a nice broad boulevard with pillars on either side. About halfway through, facing down, is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the Cardo. Right? Avigad knew he was going to find the Cardo. He found the Cardo. And here it is, and it was exciting, even though it wasn't a surprise. Okay, we are going to spend the rest of our time in the period that yielded the most impressive remains. And that, of course, is Second Temple times, very specific, the last 100 years of the Second Temple, meaning from around 40-30 before the Common Era until the destruction in the year 70. Who's the ruler, at least in the beginning of that period? King Herod. And Herod is the one who transforms the city, and he's the one that this time period is named after, the Herodian time period. And we are going to take a look at what's called the Herodian Quarter and the Burnt House. Now we'll start with the Herodian Quarter. We'll move on to the Burnt House, but in real life it was actually opposite. The Burnt House was one of the first places that Avigad and his team dug. In reality, the two are not separated. They're part of the same complex, okay? This area, a very urban but residential area, the area in the Jewish quarter that's closest to the Temple Mount, okay, had a dense collection of very incredibly beautiful mansions. Now, why here? Location. This is a great location. If you are living right here, you are steps away from the temple. Realize that in time of the Second Temple, there's a bridge that goes from the Jewish quarter, from the Western Hill, directly onto the Temple Mount. You didn't have to go down all those stairs and up all those stairs. You went straight across. And these houses are fabulous. We're going to get a little bit of a sense of them. Who lives here? We'll see in a minute. But Avigad said when he started to dig here, now the street that's closest to here today is called Mizgav Ladach. Mizgav Ladach, we might be familiar with from the hospital. Mizgav Ladach means a refuge for the destitute. And Avigad said that, after he dug here, he realized the street should have been renamed. It should have been called Mizgav Lagvir, right? A refuge for the very, very wealthy and important. So the Herodian Quarter, which today is underneath Yeshivat HaKotel, right? The modern building of Yeshivat HaKotel, which was built as this was being excavated, comprises pieces of 6 different mansions. Now, we don't have the entirety of each of these houses. We only have pieces of them, but it gives us enough to understand that, first of all, each of these houses had 2, often 3 floors, right? They all had a basement level that was meant for water installations, for cisterns, for bathhouses. We'll see in a moment. And then another floor, and often another floor as well. And everything decorated in the most fabulous of tastes. Now, who lives here? Okay. Each of these houses has 2, sometimes 3, sometimes more of what you see here. And that, of course, is a mikvah. Okay. Mikvaot, ritual baths, are everywhere. Now, even taking into account the knowledge that late Second Temple times is a time that is obsessed with purity. Okay, the Talmud says, Pardes Tahara Israel. Purity broke out all over Israel. This was the thing that was on everybody's mind. Am I pure? Am I impure? Do I have to go to the mikvah? Do I not? Have I come in contact with something dead? Even taking that into account, private homes in Jerusalem, which doesn't have a lot of water, with 2, 3, 4 mikvaot, ritual baths, it's a little unusual. That gives us a clue to who these people are. Okay? Another clue, here's a beautiful living room. Okay? Really nice. I would not mind a living room like this. Okay? The best of everything. Everything in the highest of tastes. In fact, we even have a tile pattern here. I didn't bring it to you here, but there's a tile pattern here. Opus sectile, which the only other place where it's found is in one of Herod's palaces. These guys keep up on what's trendy. Okay, beautiful mosaic carpet, but notice, okay, just like in the fanciest Roman houses of the time, unlike in the Roman houses of the time, what do you not have? No images, no people, no animals, nothing. Only geometric patterns, floral patterns, okay, no imagery. So we have people who are very interested in purity, very careful about not having images, very wealthy, close to the temple. Who are these guys? Okay, we all know already. I'm not breaking the suspense. These are priests. These are Kohanim. So the next very obvious question is, okay, where do Kohanim get money like this? Okay, Kohanim are not people who are wealthy. Okay? Kohanim are people who are supposed to live off of the gifts that the people give them. And yet we know, not only from archaeology, but from our sources, that the Kohanim, not all of them, I apologize to Kohanim in the audience, I'm sure there are some, okay? But a coterie, an elite of them in Jerusalem were corrupt, used the temple to make as much money as possible, used their connections and their position to become very, very wealthy, very, very powerful. And to understand that, you have to understand that the temple is essentially an enormous bank, right? There's a lot of money in the temple, both real money, right? Your half shekel donations, all kinds of other donations that you give. It's an actual physical bank. Not only that, there's a lot of potential for money. What do I mean by that? I mean that somebody's got to get the contract to give all the wood for the altar. Somebody's got to get the contract for the olive oil, for the sacrifices. If you happen to have a nephew who specializes in olive oil and you can get that contract for him and he gives you a kickback, very nice. Okay, and that seems to, not very nice, but that seems to be what has been done. So I brought you here one of the sources that we have. I apologize, I did not translate the whole thing. We'll read the translated part on the bottom in a moment. But this is from the Tosefta and Menachot. And basically it describes a situation where even though all of the Kohanim were supposed to share equally in the gifts that were brought to the temple, in this case, the skins of the animals, there were certain families who would come in with their thugs, right, with their strongmen, and they would take from everybody else until the situation got so bad that people refused to donate to the temple. They didn't want to be involved in this. If you look at, if you can read the Hebrew at Halacha Kaf Aleph, okay, we have a very damning description of the families of this time. Al elu va'al kayotze bahem va'al domeh lahem va'al osim k'maaseim, on all of the people who do these kinds of things. Haya Abba Shaul ben Botnit ve'Abba Yossi ben Yochanan ish Yerushalayim, with these two Abbas who were contemporaries of the Second Temple. What would they say? Oili mi beit baitus, oili me alatan. Oh no, I'm very worried about, woe is me from the house of Baitus. These are all houses of the priests. Woe is me from their curses, right? If they would curse you, that would be a terrible thing. Oili mi beit kadros or katros. Remember that name. We're going to come back to katros. Oili mi kul musan. All right. Woe is me from their pens, meaning when they write nasty things about us to the rulers and we get in trouble. Oili mi beit Elchanan. Oili mi beit lechishatan. Right. Woe is me from the house of Elchanan and from their whispers, from how they whisper about me to the leadership. Oili mi beit Elisha, oili mi egrofan. This one's very simple, right? The house of Elisha, from their fists. They would beat people up. Oili mi beit Ishmael ben Piavi, right? Woe is me from the house of Ishmael ben Piavi. Shehem kohanim gedolim, they are high priests. Ubneihem gizbarim, and their sons are treasurers. V'chotneihem amar kalim, and their sons-in-law work in the, in the business side of supplying the temple. V'avdehem ba'im v'chovtin aleinu b'maklot, and their servants come and they beat us with sticks. Right? We have a sense of a very, very corrupt and terrible situation, and it finishes with a very strong statement by Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta. Right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta goes through the various holy places. Why were they destroyed? Why was Shiloh destroyed? Because they treated holy offerings disgracefully. Why was the first building, right, the first temple of Jerusalem destroyed? Because of idolatry, sexual immorality, and spilling of blood that was in its midst, right? So far we are familiar. But we know that in the latter one, they labored in Torah and they were careful with their tithes. And why were they exiled? And we all know the answer, right? Sinat chinam. We're all raising our hands saying sinat chinam, right? Baseless hatred. The Tosefta puts it in an even stronger way. Why were they exiled? Because they loved money and they hated each other. Right? Very, very, very strong statement. So we have the roots of the destruction of Jerusalem here in the splendor of the Herodian Quarter houses. We're going to see a few more things from there. One of the things that Abigad talked about in his discoveries was that up until now, really what had been discovered in Jerusalem? Buildings, right? Monumental buildings. But we didn't have very much in the way of everyday life, ordinary life of people. And that's not something you find out too much in sources as well. And here in the Herodian Quarter, because these were people's houses, we really did get a sense of the furniture, of the setup of the living room, and even of smaller items like these. Some of them are makeup applicators. Okay, they found also dice, gaming dice. They found all kinds of dishes, right? Some of them standard pottery dishes. Some of them very expensive imported glass dishes. But a large majority, what you see here, stoneware, right? Why stoneware? Stoneware is very hard to make. It's much harder to make. It's more durable, but it's much harder, more expensive. Why would these guys be buying stoneware? Number one, it's a status symbol, right? Of course, if it's more expensive, if it's fancier, I want it. But not only that, okay? We know that, and remember, they're very interested in purity. Why are they buying stoneware? Because stoneware, unlike earthenware, cannot become impure. If someone dies in the house where you have dishes, in the room where you have dishes, those dishes, the pottery, has to be smashed, cannot be used again. It can never become pure again. Stone does not, right? Stone stays pure. So another very interesting discovery, a lot of stone vessels. This is one of my favorite things here, a few wonderful things here. This is, of course, a sundial. Right? You can see at the top, there's like a little hole that, of course, had a stick in it. You kept it outside, and it marked the hours. They actually found 2 sundials in the Herodian Quarter. Why? Because nobody in the ancient world needs to know what time it is. Nobody ever has to get on their Zoom at 4:02, right? Or call their mother at 7:59. You wake up when the sun rises. You come home and stop working when the sun sets. You eat dinner, you go to bed. Next day, you do it all over again. Who cares what time it is? The priests in the temple, because the korbanot, the ritual, the sacrifices are time-based, and they are the keepers of time, and that's why they need to know what time it is. Okay, one last thing, not discovered in the Herodian Quarter, actually discovered further away, but displayed in the museum there, and it's really fabulous, and that is this menorah. Okay, a drawing of a menorah. On the right is the original, or most of the original. On the left is the reconstruction. The two squares on the far right, okay, the bottom one we think is the table, is the shulchan, right? The table for the showbread, the lechem hapanim. The top one seems to be the mizbeach haktoret, the incense altar, meaning these are the three things that are in the chamber, the holy, in the temple. The menorah, the Ktoret, and the Shulchan, and they are drawn here. Now, why are they drawn here? That's a great question, right? We know that this was drawn contemporary with the temple standing. We have a lot of drawings of menorahs. Okay, that's not unusual. But drawings of menorahs, when the menorah is still in the temple, that's much more unusual. Why did somebody feel the need to draw this on their wall? Who knows, right? The story I always tell is that Mr. Cohen took, young Cohen Jr. to work for the day, and he came home, the kid, and he was so excited that he had to sketch this out, but we don't know, okay? It's fascinating to look at it because I'm sure many of us are familiar with the menorah from the Arch of Titus in Rome. The base there is a stepped base. Here it's a triangular base, which is correct. Subject for another conversation, but interesting to know about and to see it here. Okay, the final spot that we are going to visit is the burnt house. Okay, today the burnt house, which is very close to the Herodian Quarter, it's really across the alleyway from it. The burnt house has been turned in kind of like a multimedia presentation, where you can see a movie about the last months of the Second Temple and the destruction and the baseless hatred and the fighting that went on. But the discovery of the place itself is very powerful. Like the Herodian Quarter houses, this is a big, beautiful house with mikvaot, with stoneware, with all different kinds of things. What made it a little bit different is that it had a basement that wasn't only water installations, but also sort of semi-industrial, right? Places where you could pulverize things, mortars and pestles, different kinds of barrels. Suggestion is perhaps the family who lived here prepared the incense for the temple. No real proof, but perhaps, we don't know. But the more sensational discovery here, few sensational discoveries. One was a weight, which you can see here, the actual weight on the right, and the drawing, the reconstruction of it on the left. On the bottom, it very clearly says Katros. Remember our Katros family, right? We didn't like them so much. Here they are. Was this their house? Were they neighbors? Who knows? The top says Bet Resh, okay? And the archaeologists assumed that it was, what was cut off was a Dalit, Dibbar Katros, of the son of Katros. Actually fascinating, just a couple of years ago, the city started to reconstruct the Tiferet Israel synagogue right next door. And they found another weight like this, only this one wasn't broken. And it says Nidbarei Katros. We're not sure what that means, but it seems it's something different. But it's this Katros family lives in this area, maybe even controlled two houses. Who knows? Okay, so here they are, a family that appears in the Gemara, that appears in the Tosefta. Here they are on a weight. The other really sensational thing that was discovered was, you can see on the right, an arm and a hand based on the size of a young woman, okay? And on the left, a spear. And even more than that, everything, when Avigad started to excavate here, he realized that everything was covered in a thick layer of ashes. And he writes that, he says, I saw this, I saw the ashes, and eventually he finds this evidence of some kind of a bloody struggle. And he says, could it be that this is evidence of the destruction of the temple? Could it be? Now, we all know the destruction of the temple and the temple are all over the place in Jewish liturgy and literature. We commemorate it, we mourn over it on Tisha B'Av and on the 17th of Tammuz, and we talk about it all the time. but it's very much in the realm of talking and of thinking and of praying and of singing. But physical objects did not exist. And here you have perhaps the first physical objects from the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem. And Avigail writes about how he doubts himself. He's not sure. He's not sure. And he calls in his colleagues. He asks them, he says, maybe I'm making things up. Maybe I'm interpreting it wrong. And to a man, okay, his colleagues all agree with him that this is indeed the destruction of the city. The Romans come, destroy the temple on the 9th of Av. According to Josephus, it takes them another month till they come up to the upper city and destroy that, the 9th of Elul. But it seems that this is from that time period. And this is actually not from the burnt house, from the Herodian Quarter, a box full of the ashes that were found really everywhere. And then Avigail goes on and he says something amazing. He says, Mashu mufla hitrachesh bilibot anashim shechazu b'kol elu. Something wonderful, miraculous took place in the hearts of the people who saw all of this. Srifat Beit HaMikdash v'churban Yerushalayim, the destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem. Me'oraot goraliyim la'am hayudi, right? Very important, significant events for the Jewish people, that lived on in the memory of the people as something moving, but something very abstract that happened a long time ago. Suddenly it got a very real and shocking and disturbing meaning. People who you could tell were very shaken by this. They came by and they asked if they could take home some ashes, some wood, as a memory of the Churban, of the destruction. And this was just a very, very powerful moment in these excavations and in showing the story, but showing it in real life. Now, Avigail discovered other things as well from the Roman period, from the Byzantine period, from the Crusader period. There really is so much to talk about, but these excavations were a game changer in terms of how we look at the Jewish Quarter, how the Jewish Quarter was planned. What I think is fascinating is that the story does not end in 1982. The story continues now, still 40 years later, kept on continuing, and we keep on finding more and more pieces. So just to give you a little bit of a sense, right, this is an excavation that's done at the foot of Mount Zion. And you can see pieces of a number of walls, right, where the gentleman on the top is standing. That's a part of the Byzantine city wall, 1500 years ago. If you go down to where the woman is standing, you can see another corner. That's the Hasmonean city wall, okay, the Hasmonean city wall from 500 years earlier. And below that is a piece of Hezekiah's wall. Okay, and we're finding here and there pieces of Hezekiah's wall, just like the broad wall, also in the Kishla. Right, if you've been to the Kishla, in the Tower of David, also finding pieces of the Hasmonean wall, of Hezekiah's wall. We're finding more, there's a lot being done at the back of the Kotel Plaza. Okay, today it's all covered up because there's a massive building that's being built there by the Western Wall Heritage Foundation. But when they started to build, they discovered First Temple buildings. They discovered seals like this archer from the First Temple, mikvaot, ritual baths from Second Temple times, another cardo, right, another secondary major street, and this is all covered up now. You can't see it, but hopefully when the building is finished, you'll be able to see it again. The city of David, right, what's called the Pilgrims Road, this road that went from the Siloam Pool all the way up to the foot of the Temple Mount, everything being discovered, plus all sorts of small discoveries. The Antiquities Department has a preservation department that works in the old city. You're a merchant, you have a store in the Shuk, you want to expand your back room, and suddenly you discover that your back room is sitting on top of a Crusader cistern, right? Or a Byzantine hallway. How do you keep your shop and yet preserve the past and document the past? There's a whole department that works on that. So really unbelievable stuff. And the saga continues, and we should hopefully be traveling together in Jerusalem to see many of these things in the future. I just want to finish with just some credits for some of the pictures. Nachman Avigad's book I showed you, Professor, the scholar Eyal Miron, his drawing, and then a few things off of the internet. People who would like to ask questions. Deborah, should we have them ask in the chat? How will we like to do this?
First of all, thank you so much, Shulie. You just brought alive. I closed my eyes and I felt like I was walking through the streets of Jerusalem. I want to just, I saw that Barbara was on, who's sponsoring. If she's still here, I just wanted her to Barbara, say hello. And there are a number of Boston people, and certainly, I'm just going to put this back on. You can turn on your videos and open it up to questions, comments. Anybody?
Shulie, this is Barbara Osband. I'm not putting my picture in there because I'm in a sling and not dressed, and that feels so good. But bringing Yerushalayim to life, because it really had a rich life, was incredibly meaningful. And God willing, I'll be in Yerushalayim and I'll go on a tour with you in person. Thank you so much for today, Shulie. I really, really appreciated it.
I have a question.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, go right ahead.
Why would you need more than one mikvah in a house?
Okay, good question. Why do I need a mikvah in my house at all?
Well,
okay. That's another question, right? What you have to understand is that just like everybody is fascinated by, is obsessed with purity, priests even more so, because priests and their families who are eating from the sacrifices, who are eating from the tithes, have to eat them in purity. So I always think of it as Mrs. Cohen comes home, finishes making dinner, and she says, kids, she doesn't say kids wash up for dinner, she says, kids, go to the mikvah before dinner. So it just makes it simpler to have more than one. And again, I think you can definitely put in the status symbol element. Okay, I have more than you because I am rich and fancy.
yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, hi, Jonathan Hoba here. I have a question.
Yes.
There's obviously lots of archaeological relics from the First Temple period. Is there any archaeological evidence of the First Temple itself?
Of the temple?
You're aware of?
Okay, so here's what you have to understand. First of all, there's no digging on the Temple Mount because at the moment that is politically impossible. So that's number one. We have found from the sifting project that excavates, that goes through what was excavated underneath the Temple Mount, we have found from the time of the First Temple. But to find evidence of the temple itself, you would have to be on the mountain itself. That's number one. Number two, Herod. Okay? Herod is the ultimate bulldozer. Okay? Herod builds there's no such thing as preservation. I mean, Jerusalem up until 30 years ago, and some would even say today, there's no such thing as preservation. Herod gets rid of everything in his path. First Temple stuff is much more, it's much less grand. And Herod just gets rid of it all. So we do have evidence that the First Temple existed. We have inscriptions, we have writing from other places, for example, from Tel Arad, talks about the house of God, okay? But actual pieces of the First Temple, not at the moment.
Thank you.